Hello, Fallon. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to be chatting with you today.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, so could you just tell everyone just a little bit about yourself and what you currently do?
I would love to. So I live in the Dallas area with my husband, who is my college sweetheart. We got married about 9 years ago now, and our three boys, who I homeschool and am with full time. And I also became a business owner in December of 2020, which is when I launched Fallon's Table. And that provides metabolically supportive meal plans and recipes for women who are tired of fad diets and so many food rules and want to nourish themselves while enjoying real food. And so that's kind of my ministry and platform now, is just supporting women in their nourishment and their health goals. And yeah, I just absolutely love it.
I love that. And like I said before, like I love your posts on Instagram and stuff. Like they're just so helpful for like especially just all women experiencing, like starting a healing journey and then being scared to like reintroduce food because like that's a hard thing. Like once you remove something and you think it's like awful and just like bad for your body, it's hard to just get over that and to like just be at peace with like reintroducing those foods, even though like they're not quote unquote like bad for you. They're just food.
Yeah, it's hard though. You're right.
Yeah, for sure. So where did your like healthy, I guess, just like your healing journey, like all begin with food?
Yeah, so my middle son was really, really sick starting at about 2 months old. He had full body eczema, developed allergies, and was just not well most of the time. And we spent months and so much money and so much time, seeing specialists and trying to get to the root of it. And I just kept feeling like there was a food connection somehow. We knew that he had some allergies, and so we removed those, and that helped a little bit. But there seemed to be this underlying piece that we hadn't found yet. And so I started learning more about gut health and our food quality and toxins and all of these things that can contribute to a lowered immune system and an unhealthy gut microbiome. And so that's kind of where it started, is that my son was reacting to so many different foods. And so I kind of went down this rabbit trail of healing diets. And so that did play a vital role in our journey. In hindsight, I will say that I'm really happy with where we are now. I spent a lot of years kind of diving into those methodologies that really encourage you to cut things like, dairy and not eat so much fruit. And it's where we needed to be at the time. And that's kind of our introduction into healing through food, was that my son was just so sick and we needed answers. But it really was just beautiful. It spiraled from my son being ill. I found out I had Hashimoto's not long after that. And so honestly, I don't know that I would have dove into healing through food so quickly for myself. It was really for my son. And because he was nursing at the time, it was kind of a package deal. I had to kind of follow those new food sort of rules, is what I would call it at the time. We had so many rules around food. And while I don't love that aspect of it, we really did start learning about how healing food can be and how healing whole food can be, and stepping away from a conventional American diet, which is just highly processed and, people aren't cooking at home a lot. We moved away from that into eating real whole foods. And man, a lot happened in between, the years that happened and now, but it was kind of this slow journey of finding just nourishment through real whole food and finding healing for my son and for me. And so he was definitely the spark that set the fire for this whole journey, was just trying to find answers and healing for him. And that healing just kind of had a domino effect to me and to the rest of my family. And of course now I get to share about it with other women, and that's such an honor. But yeah, the journey has just twisted and turned over these past, it's been, I guess, about 6 years now since my son first got sick. And so it's been 6 years of learning just more about nutrition and more about nutrition science and what our body does, with the right foods and the right amount of foods and, the right energy. And it's just been a really cool thing to just continue to learn and just continue to see healing for both of us. We've come just so far.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I feel like, yeah, at first it's definitely, I feel like there's just so much information. Like it's very overwhelming with like all the healing diets that are out there, like GAPS, like AIP, like paleo. There's like so
Mhm.
many. So which one, I guess, I'm kind of curious, which one did you like start with, I guess, with like trying to like heal that eczema?
Yeah, so we kind of dove into, I think I eased into like a Whole30 style at
Okay, yeah.
first, and then really quickly escalated into AIP,
Mm-hmm.
which is just very, very restrictive. And it can be
Mm-hmm.
helpful and healing for a short amount of time
Mm-hmm.
for people with really, really compromised guts, but it's not super sustainable.
Yeah.
And so we were on full-blown autoimmune paleo, which
Mm.
removes a lot of whole foods. It
Yeah.
does remove processed foods as well, and that's fantastic. But a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the restrictions do include real whole food as well. So
Mm-hmm.
we did that for probably almost 5 years.
Oh,
We were
wow.
completely
Okay.
AIP. And then I
So,
kind of led into more of a paleo
okay.
diet as I found a little bit more healing.
Right.
And then from paleo transitioned into a more metabolically supportive
Right.
style diet. And that's where my healing just exploded. So I
Yeah.
kind of did a little bit of everything over the years.
Okay. Yeah,
Hmm.
AIP, I did it in 2020 for about 4 months and then I started to
Hmm.
reintroduce stuff. So I'm curious with you, like after like 5 years, I feel like that's so long that like you didn't like introduce anything like in those 5 years.
A few things here and there, but I,
Okay.
I have a really long journey of extreme food restriction. So again,
Okay.
it started with my son. He was so
Mhm.
reactive to everything that we collectively could not eat very much while he was nursing.
Okay.
Once he had stopped nursing, I had already restricted so much
Mm.
that I was really, really continuing to react to foods. And that's kind of the spiral that you get in,
Yeah.
if you continue to
Yeah.
just cut and cut and cut and convince yourself that that's the right choice, that all of these
Mm.
foods are dangerous. And so, yeah, I continued cutting. And I was convinced that every time I had a symptom, it was because of a food. I never took like
Mm.
stress into account or
Right.
anything other than just food. So
Mm.
I actually got down to a season, actually several different seasons where I could eat about 7 to 10 foods total,
Wow.
and then really found healing from there in kind of a few different ways. But yeah, I didn't get very far in my
Mm.
reintroductions. I was able to add in a couple things here and there, but
Mm.
still couldn't do um, a lot of the sort of paleo approved foods, like
Mm.
eggs and nightshades and
Yeah.
coffee. It was just really extensive still. And I
Mm.
did not have a great time introducing
Yeah.
because of my, I think, extreme fear around those foods.
Okay. So I just wanted to switch over to like body image because I know that
Yeah.
you talk about that a lot on your page and you share about it and food freedom as well.
Hmm.
So what was the process to like overcoming that and how did you find food freedom? Because I'm sure that, like you still have bad days where you like still like don't have like good body image days, but
Hmm.
like how did the process begin with that?
Yeah, I'll see if I can kind of intermingle these stories because they really do, go so hand in
Yeah.
hand. But the backstory is that because I was undernourished for uh, 5 or 6 years, and probably my whole life before that, it's not like I was eating super well
Mhm.
before that. I maybe thought that I was, but it was still kind of a
Yeah.
standard American diet. I wasn't really
Hmm.
prioritizing, animal proteins, and all of it was like low fat and sugar free and, kind of your standard
Yeah.
nutrition approach. So I came from a background of being way too undernourished and honestly way too thin. In
Mhm.
hindsight, my body weight was not sustainable to
Mhm.
support the health that I needed. And so once I did overcome all of the food fear that I had, which I'll touch on a little bit more in a second, but
Mhm.
I naturally had to start gaining a little bit of weight because
Yeah.
the weight that I had survived at for so long, I survived is probably not even the right word, honestly. I mean, I was not thriving. I was not doing
Yeah.
well. So naturally, I did have to gain some weight for my body to kind of reach this sense of equilibrium and balance and health.
Mhm.
So my food freedom journey is really it was so slow. I started out, I think, like I said, there was a season where I was eating maybe 7 to 10 foods, and I found this brain rewiring program. It's
Mhm.
called Dynamic Neural Retraining System, or
Mhm.
DNRS for short. And the premise behind it is that, our brain is so just incredibly created. We can literally rewire our brain connections by changing the way that we think and changing the habits that we're creating in our minds. And so I started this program in the hopes of overcoming this food fear. And so I, started viewing food and my symptoms through a completely different light than I had in the past. And because of that program, and because of just the principle of brain rewiring in general, was able to start overcoming some of that really major food fear, and started being able to introduce foods from that. This still was a point of pretty extreme restriction for me. Even after doing the program and introducing more food, I still had another couple of years where I couldn't eat, eggs and tomatoes and coffee and dairy. All of those things were still not a part of my diet. But the brain rewiring program kind of gave me a step in the right direction. And then once I found metabolic eating is when I really started evaluating my relationship with food, the way that I viewed real whole foods, and started kind of questioning, okay, why am I so afraid of something like dairy, for example, that has been around basically forever? I think about what ancestral societies would have been eating, what foods would have existed 300, 400, 500 years ago, and dairy is one of them. Plant milks are not.
No.
And so it's funny that I was consuming almond milk and whatever other knockoffs that I was replacing for dairy. But I just started questioning, okay, why is it that I'm afraid of these foods? Is it because someone told me to be? Is it because I feel like I have a logical reason to be? And so I really started diving into all of that, and diving into, what are the arguments behind something like, fruit or dairy or carbs in general, not being something that's supportive. And I just found the evidence extremely lacking in terms of supporting that those foods were not supportive. What I did find is that they have existed forever. They've been a part of people's diets forever. And once I started including them is really when I felt that freedom around food, and I felt that I could eat things that I wanted to eat, that I looked forward to eating, that I enjoyed eating, because I felt just incredibly deprived for those 5 or 6 years that I was doing, AIP, Whole30, paleo. And I would always feel sad when I saw like my husband, getting to drink coffee, or, getting to, I don't know, have pizza, or, something that I was convinced that I can't have that. And I always felt such a sadness over it. And so once I started pursuing food freedom and eating things that I knew were supportive to my body, and changing my mindset around that, I mean, it's just wild how much my relationship with food changed. And so, back to the body image and food freedom, both I think there's still a daily battle, in the sense that I don't think that you get to this point, especially with so many years of, just questioning your body, or questioning your image, or questioning your food. I think that it's a daily reminder for me personally that, I play devil's advocate with myself, and often have to say, okay, why is dairy nourishing? Why is fruit nourishing? And I think those questions are good to ask. I think it's good to ask ourselves, okay, why do I think this food should be included in my diet or not included in my diet? And I think that we have to kind of remind ourselves of the reasons behind those things. And with the body image too, I think it's a daily thing that I have to remind myself that my health is not defined by my weight. I am not defined by my weight or my body. People don't define me by my weight or my body, my friends and family, and nobody's friends and family. People don't love you more or less because of your appearance or your body image, but we get so hung up on it. We're our own worst critic, of course. So I think it's just a daily reminder that we have to kind of choose to walk in that freedom, that that health and nourishment don't always look like what our society thinks that they do. And we have to just sort of choose to, stand our ground and preach to ourselves the truth of what we know. And it's just kind of an ongoing reminder of what you believe about yourself and about food.
Yeah, that's so true. And I'm curious with like the DNRS training, how long did it take for you to like start reintroducing foods? And I guess to get like where you are now, like, do you need to like keep doing it each week or like a few times a month? What's the process with that?
Yeah, so the program is really great in that it does outline specifics once you are like taking the course, which I don't know if I mentioned, it's like an at-home DVD course, which is
Mm.
fantastic because you can do it kind of at your own pace. But they really encourage you to start kind of playing around with being around some of your triggers within a few
Okay.
days. So even within a few days of doing the program, I noticed my symptoms had decreased
Wow.
drastically. I was able to start slowly adding in foods pretty immediately.
Wow.
And the program encourages you to do the steps and the method for an hour a day for 6 months straight. And
Okay.
I did it. I committed to
Yeah.
it and it was worth it. I mean, just the freedom and the healing that I found from it
Mm.
was just so significant. And again, that wasn't the entire journey of my healing. I had a lot of other
Mhm.
things that contributed, but that piece alone was just so helpful. But it's
Mm.
intensive for sure. You have to really commit
Yeah.
to that daily practice,
Yeah.
and I think it's worth it.
For sure. Yeah. I know that my cousin is starting to do it because she's been doing AIP for, I think, probably around the same time that you had done it, like 6 or 7 years. And yeah,
Wow.
she's really down to like not many foods. And she's seen lots of different doctors, like naturopaths, like regular doctors. And yeah, she heard about this and so she's trying it. So I'm excited to see that hopefully she can start
That's
reintroducing
amazing.
more foods. But yeah, I've heard like lots of good like testimonies on it and like hearing yourself too as well. Like it's just great to like see people, like not eating barely like anything and then to eating all the things that they could before.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Um, so how did you stop fearing, like real food, like fruit, dairy, and carbs? I know that you touched on it a little bit. Could you go but like a
Hmm.
bit to more like to those foods?
Yeah, I think again, it took kind of questioning the logic behind why I had decided to fear those foods in the first place. And so I think looking at it for me from a historical perspective was incredibly helpful.
Mm.
So taking a look at societies that have been thriving for thousands of years and people groups that have been thriving, and then just thinking about what would our great 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 grandparents have been eating.
Mm.
And I think about if I had been raised on a farm or raised somewhere where locally sourced food was readily available,
Mhm.
what would those foods have been? And it would have been things like something that an animal can produce. So if you're
Yeah.
raising cows, then you're going to have access to the meat, the dairy.
Mm.
It would have been things that were grown, so in season fruits and vegetables. And so I couldn't wrap my head around why would those items just all of a sudden not be nutritious anymore,
Mhm.
after existing from the dawn of time. I mean, literally, fruit
Yeah.
was the first food in the Bible, even
Yeah.
like fruit was what God gave Adam and Eve in the
Mhm.
Garden of Eden. And I can't wrap my head around how can that be
Mm.
bad?
Yeah.
And of course, we have to take into account that our food today is so different
Mm.
from what it has been historically. It's been tampered with, a lot of it. Our dairy is often fortified, and our
Yeah.
animals aren't being raised in a regenerative and um, sustainable manner like they would have been hundreds of years ago. But the root of it is the food itself. You can find a local farmer that's treating their animals well and not adding GMO feed to their diet. You can find fruit that's been grown organically. And I think that's the big difference, is that when we look at food that honestly can be a poor source of nutrition, conventionally farmed dairy, or fruit that's been just heavily treated with pesticides, I can see why those foods have been
Mm.
targeted. But I can also see the logic that, okay, in their real natural state, they are still nutritious. And so
Mm.
I think that it just comes back to, again, sort of playing devil's advocate and asking, why do I think these foods are bad? Do I honestly
Mm.
have a good enough reason to stand behind that fruit is not supportive or dairy is not supportive? And for me, I just came to the conclusion that no, the evidence was not there.
Yeah.
That it wasn't an overwhelming argument to me to come to a conclusion that those things were not supportive or helpful.
Mhm. And did you find that when you came to that conclusion, like with like finding pro-metabolic, you were like with your research with that?
Yeah, I was sort of closed off to the idea of, dairy being supportive. Fruit has always been a part of my diet, but I sort of followed the rule of like maybe 2 to 3 pieces a day and no more than that.
Right.
And so, yeah, once I entered the metabolic sphere is when I really started considering, okay, why did I have all these questions before? And my son had developed a dairy allergy at a young age. And so that's kind of what spiraled us into like, oh, dairy is just bad and we have to avoid it. And so finally, kind of entering into the work of, all of the fantastic people who are spearheading the metabolism movement, sort of as we know it. It wasn't until then that I really kind of had my eyes opened to the potential that dairy had in our diets. And my husband and I still laugh because it's after 5 or 6 years of insisting that no dairy come into our household, and now we're going through gallons of milk in a week. It's still just really funny, but yeah, I think that finding the metabolism and sort of food freedom realm is what really opened my eyes to things like dairy and animal proteins just being so healing.
I feel like that's just like amazing, I guess, just like that 360 like turnaround, right? To be like, yeah, just like very like just eating like all the like the nut milks and and stuff like that, and then switching to like raw dairy and just having that now.
yes complete turnaround.
Yeah, so with like I guess reintroducing dairy and stuff, did you not have any reactions to begin with? I'm just like curious with like acne or like breakouts or like digestive pain.
Yeah, I will say I'm a pedal to the metal type person. And I went too quickly. And so I did kind of have some responses, not so much that I felt like I needed to stop or scale back, but with dairy in particular, it really is important to take a slow and steady approach. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to create the dairy reintroduction meal plan that I have on my site. Because the thing is, when you go years and years without dairy, your body stops producing the lactase enzyme needed to break down lactose. So if you reintroduce it really, really quickly, your body can definitely have some problems. So slow and steady is definitely the way to go. I for sure had some symptoms because I went too hard and too fast. And so I use that as an example of what not to do and encourage people to really take it slow, listen to their bodies. But it's also hard, when you've been missing those really good fat soluble vitamins, that really good calcium for years and years, your body just wants it and it just craves it. And so it's really hard not to dive in full force. I think long term, your body will definitely thank you for going a little bit slower when you're trying to add dairy back in particular.
Yeah, for sure. I've heard that you can even start with like a tablespoon just to start out, just because, like you said, you lose that lactase, like that enzyme. And so just like working your way up, I guess, to like eventually get to like a cup of milk or so,
I think that's a fantastic approach. Yeah.
So could you explain the importance of like eating enough and like why 1,200 calories is not sustainable for our bodies, since like just so many women like nowadays are just undernourished, since it's just, I think we're just pushed from like magazines and stuff, just saying like these body images of like women, and it's like, this is the way you need to look, and then we're just therefore like not eating enough.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my favorite conversations. So, you think about food, and what it comes down to is that it is energy. Calories are energy, food is energy. And so if we have a minimum requirement that our bodies need to function, so let's say, our minimum requirement is 1,800 calories, just to kind of pull a random number. If we've been consistently eating, let's say 1,300 calories, our body is going to start sacrificing some of those sort of secondary functions. So, your body wants to prioritize living, breathing, keeping your organs functioning. So, this is when we start to see things like hair falling out, and cycle health is all over the place, and you don't have any energy, and there's mood swings. Infertility can be one. I mean, there's so many things that can fall under this under eating category, because we can't get around that food is energy. It's like, if you don't give a car gas, it's not just going to magically run. You have to have that fuel. And so this is why we see a lot of women in particular whose bodies have just started sort of breaking down because they don't have the requirements that they need. So in terms of, evaluating calories, if we're going to use the example of like 1200 to 1300, because I feel like that's a really popular range, honestly, that even certified nutritionists will put women on this range, and it just is baffling to me. So the short explanation is that, we have something that's called our basal metabolic rate, or BMR for short. And that's the amount of calories that we need for our body to literally just survive. So if we were sitting there doing absolutely nothing, so like if I sat on the couch all day long, my BMR would be, for me personally, probably, I don't know, between 14 and 1500 calories, which again is for me to sit there.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
for me to get up and walk. It's not for me to, chase my kids or exercise. So when we add in activities like, we're chasing our kids around all day, or we're exercising, or we're moving and breathing and walking, our calorie needs go up gradually. Most women find that they really should not be eating fewer than about 2000 calories in a day. And it makes perfect sense when you look at what our bodies require. And it's interesting, if you go find like a nutritional chart of, sort of recommended caloric intake, you'll find that 1200 to 1300 range is usually the need of like an active toddler or like an active, 4 or 5-year-old. So for grown women who are trying to either raise children or have children, or, run a business or work, I mean, they cannot thrive off of 1300 calories. And so we just see women in our culture just burning out and, developing all of these health problems because they're not eating enough. They're not eating, enough nutrients. And, it's not just about calories. Obviously, nutrients come into play. But the thing is, if you want more nutrients, that does mean more calories. Nutrients don't just kind of appear out of thin air. There, we have to pair that with food. And so I think evaluating calorie intake and, really making sure that you're eating enough is honestly one of the foundations of finding health long term, is just to make sure, you're giving the body the fuel that it needs.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also like increasing like protein too. I feel like women, it's like very hard, I think, to like get protein in. Like I know like for myself, like before I was getting into like metabolism stuff, I feel like I was only eating like 50 grams of protein like each day, when you're really supposed to be eating, I think, like a minimum 100. So just to like for like all your body's needs, like when you're like doing activities like you said, like even just like walking or just like moving around the house, if you're doing like garden work, like you just need that. And that's also, I think, where like you start to see like hair loss, like fatigue and whatnot, because like protein is just like so important. Also like carbs as well, because that's like our body's like main source of like energy. But yeah.
Yeah, they're both so important. And I think you're spot on that protein can be hard to come by because, we've been told for the past couple of decades now that, red meat is bad and eggs are bad. And so, it's becoming increasingly more difficult for women to prioritize protein. And it really is important that we are getting, like you said, like 100 grams plus a day. And most women aren't. So yeah, that's a great starting point too.
Yeah, for sure. So with being on many restrictive diets, like as you said, and just I guess like healing diets as well in the past, how did you get back like in the kitchen? Or I guess was that always something that really inspired you with like beginning to create like meal plans for Fallon's table?
Yeah, that's a great question. I honestly have always loved cooking and creating. And I think honestly, what was sort of the catalyst for my being in the kitchen all the time were those restrictive diets, funny enough, because I was so desperate to create something that still felt enjoyable. When you can only eat so many foods, it's sometimes hard to come up with meals and snacks and, desserts that feel like, oh, this is enjoyable and this is fun. And I love this. And so oddly enough, I feel like that's kind of what really sped up my journey of really loving being in the kitchen, is because it was sort of birthed out of necessity that I needed to find a way to, make fun food for my kids, but we could only eat so many things. And so it really became so much more fun to create and be in the kitchen once my diet expanded, because I could make nourishing things that I had been missing out on. I have to laugh at how many substitutes I tried to make over the years, all the cauliflower stuff and all of the, cashew based dairy knockoffs. I mean, just all of the things that I tried to recreate. And so being able to actually use the real whole food instead, I can make mashed potatoes and I can make something with cheese and I don't have to find some, weird substitute. That's been so much more fun to just have, I can just use potatoes instead of making some weird like cauliflower concoction. So that's been so much fun. And then of course I love that, I can take this love of creating and recipe developing and just share it with people. Not everyone has that desire to, come up with new ideas in the kitchen. And so I love that, I have the time and energy to do that and to pass it on. And, I love that my creations really can translate into something that people can benefit from. That just means so much.
Yeah. And I think, like we said, like, obviously when you're just on such a restrictive diet, like it kind of pushes you in a way to like, okay, like what can I find to make so I can like still eat something like good, because you cannot find something like in the store that you'll just be in the vegetable aisle looking around. And so, but then also I feel like it can also be hard in that way to be like finding stuff online or just trying to like create yourself. Was there any like pages or like books that like inspired you like for that?
Yeah, I think I had every like paleo AIP cookbook under the sun. The paleo approach is a fantastic one, the healing kitchen. And it's great. I've gotten to connect with some of these women now whose, cookbooks I was using for all that time, but there actually really is an extensive network of AIP and Whole30 style resources. And so I am thankful for the people that created things that, we could use in that season. So yeah, there's lots of really great resources out there for recipes for, people who have to be a little bit more restricted for a time.
Yeah. So I have one last question for you. What is one thing that you do to live nourished?
I love that. From a food aspect, I try to get in things, daily or weekly that are really supportive. So things like the raw carrot salad, liver, bone broth. But I do think, nourishing ourselves does go deeper than just the food aspect. And so for me, I love to be in community with people who are gracious and supportive and, who can point me to goodness and kindness and also ask me the hard questions. And I think my favorite thing, honestly, is merging the two and, having people over for dinner to eat a really nourishing meal together in community. And so that's something that we really try to prioritize on a regular basis, is just inviting people into our home, having a meal with them, a long, relaxed meal, as much as we can with our boys running around, but, have good conversation. Because I think the nourishment of food is so important. And I think that, the joy and abundance that comes from being in community with people is just as important. So I love to kind of marry those desires that I have, whenever I can, and just cook for people.
Yeah, I agree. Like connection is like so important, and as we probably learned over like the past like couple years, with everything like closing down, like we need to be in community with people. It's just like so important. Like obviously, like God created that, for us to be in connection with one another. We're not meant to be like isolated alone, because then our health just obviously declines, like especially like our mental health. Yeah. So where can everyone find you and connect with you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, my handle is Fallon Danae, and my website is fallonstable.com, and those are kind of my primary platforms. And then I have a podcast that I co-host with my friend Corey. It's called the Freely Rooted Podcast, and we try to just make metabolic health really accessible and easy to understand. So that's a great place to come find us. And yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I love listening to your podcast. I listen to it every
Thank
week
you.
with Corey. Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, I had her on 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it was a really great.
Yeah, that's right. I love that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Of course. Thank you for having me.